it's night and day. I mean, these necromancers are going around one-shotting nightmare dungeons 20 levels higher than the current level they are, and the barbarian was just really struggling, especially with like high player count content, and from what I understand, this patch isn't gonna make it all that much better.
Hello and welcome one and all to what's meant to be patch analysis, but I think is inevitably going to be the beginning of a Diablo Builds podcast. I'm, of course, KP, your host, and I'm joined by some wonderful, intelligent faces on my right or left. I don't know which way it is. With perspective, we've got Abanurk, who also goes through by Josh. He is one of our math guys over at Diablo Builds, very intelligent guy, spends more time than he's willing to admit in spreadsheets just trying to do the maths of things. And then on the lower side, we've kind of separated the people who are at Diablo Builds behind the scenes with the people that are the friendly faces that you probably know and love. I've got LuckyLuciano. Of course, I think he's well known by now around the Diablo 2 sphere and is quickly becoming known in the Diablo 4 sphere. And alongside him, another face familiar to anyone who comes from D2, Mekalb. Both of these people very highly skilled speedrunners from the D2 community, have been sticking with D4. And boys, we are going to be here to break down something dear to our hearts. Patch 1.1.1. I'm surprised they did. They probably should stick more ones on that. But before we get really in deep, I think the best way to start this off, we'll do it clockwise around. 2 sentences to sum up our feelings on this patch. I'm going to ambush Josh with this and start off with him.
Look, I hope it diversifies the meta. They buffed a lot of underused skills and items, but I don't know if it's enough to shift things around.
Okay, Mekalb?
Yeah, I am terrified for this build or this new patch, and I just hope that I'm wrong and that it's actually better for Barbs than what I think it is.
Lucky?
Yeah, so as a rogue player, I'm happy with the patch. They didn't really break anything that worked. They gave us a little bit more, a little bit more ammunition to play with. Like Josh said, they boosted some skills that maybe were underutilized, and adding build diversity is never a bad thing. So pretty pleased.
Okay, my summary. I'm not going to be as diplomatic about this. 1.1.1 seems appropriate because I'm hoping there's at least one more big patch after this. This is kind of maybe underwhelming for a lot of people, but we can start to get into that. I think the place to start here, probably just at the top, right? Apparently there was some concerns around sorcerers and barbarians performance, and they wanted to try and rectify that. And considering that one of those two classes should prick someone in this course ears, I think we start off by going to our barb expert, Mekalb, someone who, as I understand it, has lived and breathed the way of the barbarian for a very long time.
Yeah, where do you want me to start?
I mean, you can just tear it apart if you want. I mean, this is a summary thing, right? If you want to start off in the specifics, or you just want to go at it from a high level, be my guest.
Let's do a high level. So I remember I started watching the Diablo stream, and like at the beginning of it, when they started talking about Diablo 4, they usually try to start off with like a highlight, right? And everyone knew that this was supposed to be about Barb, and very close secondary about sorceress buffs as well. But these were supposed to be like the highlights for the Diablo 4 section. And I just remember they were talking about Hellhammer was the first thing. They dedicated a whole slide to Hellhammer. That's the upheaval unique. And I saw those buffs, and it was so incredibly meaningless that I just thought, this is going to be a really bad. I'm just going to be pissed out of my mind by the end of this. And I was. So that was kind of my first impression. I was like, we are not addressing the issues with Barb, and I don't know what this is, but I will still never use that. I see that drop, I will go ahead and get 200,000 gold from it.
Are you getting like PTSD me just highlighting it like this? Do you want to just go away from the screen?
They have some buffs. They have some buffs. It's just not the ones you wanted.
All right, talk people through this at home that maybe aren't familiar with Hellhammer, right? What is it offering, and what is this failing to improve upon in your eyes?
So, I mean, I think Barb has an issue with early, middle, and late game. I'm a speedrunner, so I watch streams all day, every day about the first 30 levels, the first 40 levels, and Barb is very underwhelming. And the only time I can really justify doing upheaval type, this is an upheaval unique specifically, and the only time I can really justify using it is kind of in the mid game, maybe the first 10 levels, and then like do an arsenal from like level 40 to 60. I think it's okay, but it's still maybe a B tier type of a build. And all they're doing is increasing like when you throw an upheaval, which is a pretty big AoE, but at this point it doesn't really kill everything, and it's got horrible single target damage, and it's just kind of increasing the damage, a little bit of burn on the ground. And if you're talking about that type of damage, it's like you'll do maybe 2 to 3% total damage from burning. Now it's up to maybe 5% of a monster's health from burning, type of an upgrade. So it's not really a buff in my eyes.
And so like part of the issue you said is, well, you'd use it kind of like in the mid game, and I guess the issue there is even getting it in time for the mid game. Like I mean, I don't know if anyone else has been spat on by the RNG kings, but like, well, I got to level 80 as a rogue before I found Penitent Greaves. That's how deep I had to. And like Lucky's got a little smirk, like, you know what I mean? Like Penitent Greaves is pretty much on every single build, right?
Yeah, someone in my Discord didn't get it until 97. Was their first drop of Penitent Greaves, and it's we're talking about uniques right now specifically, and what the one thing that I will say that was encouraging about the patch was that they have identified that 95% of these uniques are basically garbage. Nobody's using them. Like you have these fixed stats that are just maybe not well thought out, or they thought that we would really value these certain affixes that basically people have thrown in a bucket as this affix is worthless. Don't even roll it on an item. And then you have aspects on your uniques that are barely better than legendaries most of the time. So these items really aren't being used in a lot of cases. Like Penitent Greaves is a great example. That's one of the more popular ones for a rogue. You really don't see much else used. When we're looking at other classes, I know the druids have some helm options as uniques that are getting some play, but really not a lot of builds work the uniques into their build. We have actually really strong uniques, but statistically speaking, Josh, you could speak to this. What are the chances we even find a super unique in the game? Like, where these uniques that we have access to are just not doing it. So it's encouraging that they are looking to change them. I would have liked to see more in this patch, but the fact that it's on their radar, I think, is good for the future, because it'll be in the back of their mind when introducing more and continuing to change the existing pool of unique items.
I think historically in these ARPG genre games, the unique items you kind of build around. You have a skill that links to the unique, and you kind of go from there. It's not that uniques are really good, it's that they synergize with a type of build, but those builds are just not meta, and so those uniques are just not meta. Penitent Greaves, as an example, is just a universally good item. It just chills and gives you damage. So you can throw it into any build, and it automatically has value. But this Hellhammer critical strike, but the dot doesn't crit build doesn't really make any sense. And because it's B tier at best, it'll just never be used. And I think a lot of those uniques kind of fall into this trap where they're very specific, except for the Harlequin crest, which is just broken, but no one can get it. So you just don't see them that often.
Yeah, I think like one kind of interesting thing here, and maybe Mekalb also felt this. This is just a knock-on effect of what's already been occurring. It's like, I think to the changes they made for season 1, I imagine as a barb you weren't happy with that to begin with, and I think even as a rogue, right? Because I think like Josh, you play rogue as well, right? Primarily.
No, right now I'm playing Necromancer.
Okay, you're Necro. So you were Flexi, but we got
I'm
two
having
rogues.
a great time.
Yeah,
You're chilling.
I got buffed.
You piece of crap. Get out of this. Cool, man. This is a
No,
Dark
it's
playing
good.
field.
I'm happy for you.
But like the feeling that I had is that builds that were already good got better. Builds that couldn't function already got worse. And I don't understand this balancing process. Like, people like Bob just got hung out to dry. Necro was just sleeper pick. No one realized, right? They got memed on for being terrible in Race 12 first season 0 because you had to run places. And now that everything just comes to you in like Stronghold Farm 1 through 50, whoop-de freaking doodah, right? But like most classes, I feel like they went from having, 1 or 2 extra kind of viable builds to now being like, you play this way or you don't play at all.
Well, I've been saying for a while, KP, that I think the meta is like severely unexplored.
Mm.
I think it's because people aren't really aware of the tool we're building at Diablo Builds, the calculator tool. But there really aren't many Peewee Ninja, meta displays. That information is largely hidden from the community, and so when people look for information, they only look towards the top searched builds, the highest, SEO kind of builds, which are the biggest influencers and with the most searched things. And so if you look at the statistics, you have certain builds with 65-70% popularity amongst the community.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, this is sometimes the case in a game like Path of Exile, but it's kind of like very solid how the meta is right now. And so most of these builds are just very unexplored.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of potential in these builds to do really well given the right items and synergies, but people, just aren't really interested in searching for it.
Mm-hmm. Do you guys feel the same way? Like, Lucky, do you think that's the case?
I would it's tough to compare Path of Exile and Diablo 4 because Path of Exile has a much larger depth, I feel like, to character building. In addition to that, I mean, we're talking about a very mature game, a decade old, and they not only do you have versatility in terms of your passive tree in Path of Exile, you've got extra specializations. You've got an item pool that is vastly superior to the current, options that we have in Diablo 4. How many aspects, how many legendary aspects do we even have access to? And how many builds do you see out there, no matter what class you are, that are using the same exact aspects as every other class? Like, there's not this versatility that we are given to play with to really explore all those options, Josh. Like, I'd love to have twice the amount of legendary aspects or unique items in the game, just so that there is actually more that we could do and experiment with. But at the end of the day, if I'm looking at the legendary aspect trees and I see I'll get 20% damage from throwing this one on, I can look at everything else and determine that no other legendary aspect is going to be better than that. It doesn't matter what the build is. There's not unique enough to actually, add enough to a build that it's going to really move the marker on something that is maybe unexplored. So I do think that maybe we have explored Diablo 4 at a surface level, but I'm afraid that if we look beneath that, we're not going to find much else. If I'm being honest, and I played a decent amount of Path of Exile. I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but if we're trying to compare the two, there's really no comparison in character building.
It's kind of like what you're describing there is the worry that what we might have as a pig wearing makeup, right? It's like there are some good things about D4, but like you said, when we dig deep, how does it look? I think to Mekalb's point around uniques, right? Like Mekalb, the reality is like unique should be opening up niche builds, right? Like Path of Exiles has that. I remember I play a lot of Path of Exiles in the past, and I remember I'm a ranger there as well, right? I follow the rogue class. I love it. And one of my favorite ones was it was called a Flicker Strike build. But to do that Flicker Strike build, you had to find a specific sword for it to even begin to function. If you didn't have that unique, your build fell apart. And I don't know about you, Mekalb, but I feel like we've got uniques that are just BIS in any build, but we haven't got like necessarily builds that truly emerge because of a unique.
Yeah, about 24 hours after they initially had that stream, what was it, like Wednesday of last week or something, is when the day before I sent some notes to the devs, and I sent it way too late, if I'm being completely honest. But one of the recommendations I gave for Barb is that you will be able to put an aspect on it. Because Barb has two two-handed weapons, which means it's twice as powerful of an aspect when you put it on. But you absolutely can't give up one of those. Even with these uniques, like even if they do cool stuff, you cannot give that second big aspect up. So I said you should be able to apply an aspect on top of it. And then suddenly I think all of these D and maybe C tier builds for Barb that the uniques are supposed to kind of complement, suddenly they might be B tier. Maybe someone can pull an A tier, maybe an S tier. I don't know. But I thought, like, at a minimum, like, you absolutely cannot give up that aspect for any of Barb's. And I think that a change like that, I don't know about other classes, but a change like that would have done Barb pretty well, and maybe made these cool builds work even at a late game.
Druids have Tempest Roar. That's the only unique item that really comes to mind as being build enabling, essentially, or something you make a build around. I can't think of anything on Rogue. I mean, I was encouraged when I saw Eaglehorn. I thought the actual aspect on it looked cool, but what'd they give us? They gave us another bow unique. Nobody's using bows. Blizzard. We need crossbows. That's crossbows are the money. It's unfortunate, but we've got now 3 bows and no crossbow uniques, and they're all kind of lackluster. The Eaglehorn effect is really cool though. I think penetrating shot is a neat build, but it's just missing something to really put it over the top and be build enabling like we define it.
It's interesting because like that's the thing. So like you do your melee rogue. I let you have that. You can be the meta lucky. I'm over here being a bow rogue. Okay, I'm like I'm the hipster trying to find the next thing, right? And I can tell you, I've tested all the builds. The best one is Barrage by far. But the weird part is like Barrage isn't even a bow build. It's basically a melee build, right? You're a shotgun, which means that you are in close quarters, which means you can't take advantage of those uniques because you're not getting the distance modifier, which ends up being like, you can get, I think it's like plus 60% damage to distant enemies, but they're never going to be that far away. And I think like, another thing that kind of, when I look at those, that kind of feels backwards is like, for Rogue specifically, it's the basic ranged attacks, you always pick puncture. There's no alternative. The other two just like they fall flat, right? So it's like you kind of get, I think there's kind of like this element where maybe a baseline, it's a combo of the uniques, and also it kind of feels like to a certain degree, at least for some classes, your skill choices are limited as well, right? Like there's some skills you just look at and it's like you're not going to carry that viability. To the aspect point, I think one interesting thing, at least with some classes, not so much with others, is I think the hearts have kind of been like a pseudo aspect, right? I think we go to Josh first so that he can just nerd out about this because being a necromancer, he knows exactly what I'm talking about. Necros seem to have been the biggest benefactor of the introduction of hearts. It kind of feels like that is the kind of gauging point that you want to have out of these hearts, right? Like a pseudo aspect. Some classes I feel like Rogue, I didn't necessarily feel it. And Mekalb can speak in a moment, Barb, but from Josh, your perspective as a Necro main at the moment, did you feel like the hearts really hit the spot?
Oh yeah, they're completely broken on Necromancer. It's insane. Yeah, it's a great time. I like spawned into the game and I'm like, what the heck? I thought I was gonna suck, and I'm broken. I'm like, this is incredible. I played Sorcerer last patch, and now I'm just OP. It's incredible.
Technically, you do suck.
But
You just suck everyone in and kill them.
well, it's true. Yeah. So I refuse to play the most meta builds because I like to just kind of explore a bit. So Bone Spear's off the table immediately for me, right? It's too boring, not fun enough. I want to do new things. And when I make a build and it works, then I jump to the next one. I'm like, oh, that was good. And when it's really bad, I try to fix it. If it's irredeemable, well, that happens. I made a terrible Incinerate build season 1. Don't try Incinerate yet, even if they buffed it. It's got a long way to go. But yeah, I mean, I made a Shadow Blight related dot build, and I think all of the Wrathful Hearts on Necromancer are insane. The fact that you just pull everything in and you're just constantly pulling it in, and then now I have Blight that pulls things in too. Like I'm basically 2 Necromancers in one. I got twice the pulls. It's amazing. And you just apply Vulnerable for free. So because Corpse Tendrils just passively pulls everything in and applies Vulnerable, the main problem with builds is how do I get vulnerable on mobs?
Yeah.
That's generally the biggest question. Like, okay, maybe this build does less damage than this other ability, right? But like, really what it comes down to is, okay, yes, I'll do less damage, but I need vulnerable, right? This is why all these sorcerers pick up ice shards. It's why all the necromancers originally picked up bone spear, right? This is why everyone has exploit. How do I get vulnerable? And now necromancers just have it for free. 100% of the time, pretty much, whenever I want it. And it doesn't even cost a spell cast. So this gives you a lot of freedom with how you want to play the game. But really, everyone just kind of gravitated towards crit and big numbers.
How about you, Mekalb? Like, what was your perspective as a barb? Like, other issues aside, did you really feel like the hearts added anywhere near enough?
Yeah, I'm kind of glad that Necromancer was brought up, and like how Necromancer can keep vulnerable up, because I think that that's the number one issue with Barb. And if I take a minute to explain what Barb's issues are, basically, if you can't keep up vulnerable the whole time and you can't kill monsters invulnerable, which the only real way to get monsters vulnerable is with the exploit glyph, then Barb can't keep that vulnerability up on the monsters, and then Barb can't kill stuff, or Barb, it takes either a long time to kill them, or Barb ends up dying in the mix. So bringing up these hearts for Barbarian, I feel like, yeah, if you throw a Barber in there, which really is far and away the best heart for Barb, the others, they're okay. They're better than some aspects, I think, in power. They're all right on their own. But the issue with Barb, and Lucky talked about this earlier, is if like Barb can't, if you can't stand toe to toe with the monsters in front of them and kill them in a fast amount of time, then Barb just gets blown up. And if you go from stuff that's your level to suddenly 10 levels higher or 20 levels higher than you, Barb inevitably dies because you can't kill them in those 3 seconds. So Barb's main issue is we can't keep vulnerable up. I think if you could keep vulnerable up as Barb, then you don't have to focus on, you won't die as much, and you don't have to focus on so many defensive skill points and glyphs and gear. You can focus more on offensive, and then you can keep up damage with other classes. But because we can't keep the vulnerable up, I think stuff like these hearts, they're a nice change, but they don't really bridge the gap for Barbarian like I felt like it really did for the other classes.
I guess Lucky's he's in a second most gifted place, right? Actually, I don't know. What do you think? Is like Rogue second best right now, or like third best behind Druid and Necro?
Number one.
You think Rogue's? You still think
Rogue's
Rogue's
always
better than
number
Necro?
one. What are we even talking? Is that even a conversation to have? Like, is that a debate that's happening somewhere? Is that's something besides Rogue is the number one class?
I don't know.
That's
Those
news to me.
Necros looked feisty and raced the world first. That's all I'll say.
McCall, I had to actually follow up on your Barb vulnerable. Did you have any thoughts on how best Blizzard could implement the ability for Barb to apply vulnerable better? Like, what would be your suggestion?
Yeah, so it kind of comes down to two things with Barb. One of them is you use Steel Grasp, which is a spell that it's like what's the tendril, the necromancer pole. Yeah, it's a lot like pole, but it pulls him right into Barbarian. So when we hit Nightmare Dungeon in World Tier 4, that was the only way I could really get monsters vulnerable, but I pull them right into me and I just explode. So Barb can't do that, right? So if you want to push really high content, I feel like Steel Grasp is a trap because you have to really focus on actually surviving the pull. And that's really the only consistent way that you can keep vulnerable up for Barbarian is you can force that pull, which causes you to berserk, which is do more damage and run faster, but it also makes the enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds. The other thing that Barb has is Pressure Point, which is in the core skill tree. It's a passive. And 3 for 3 points into that, it gives you 30% lucky hit chance to make enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. And no Barb that I know of really focuses on lucky hit chance. And Hoda or Whirlwind are both pretty bad at getting lucky hit chance to go off. So in a 20-second cycle of the exploit glyph, you get the first 3 seconds for free, and then maybe you'll get 1 or 2 procs again in those 20 seconds, and it's just not sustainable. So I said if Blizzard wants to be really lazy about bringing Barb up almost to every other class, is they would triple the lucky hit chance on Pressure Point. I honestly think that would fix the class, but I know that Blizzard doesn't want every class to be dependent on vulnerables, so they probably just didn't want to do something like that.
Yeah.
I think there's a better solution. Again, one of my favorite things about this season is the fact that because I'm a necromancer and everything just constantly gets corpse tendrilled and then vulnerable, just free without me even pushing a button. And I just don't even have to worry about it. I can explore whatever I want build-wise. I can go Bone Spirit. I can go a full Corpse Explosion build. I can go Shadow Dots. And none of these builds would have given me vulnerable before. And if I just had Corpse Tendril, I wouldn't have had high vulnerable uptime because there's a long cooldown, even if I tried to reduce it. So really what they need to do is, in order for people to branch out from these builds that need vulnerable and only a few days to get it, and you said you don't really want to go Steel Grasp, make a generic aspect that just gives you the option to apply new ways of vulnerability. I mean, the fact that I just get it for free as a Necromancer opens me up to so many more options. Spending an aspect slot should be like a very easy way to give people that ability because it's such a core part of your character that you need to get. So there's really no reason to restrict it behind a couple builds that really just kind of restricts everyone. Open it up, give people options.
Right. At the end of the day, they're not going to take it away from the other classes, right? So if you really want to balance it, you have to do other things, but you have to make every class at least have the accessibility to use the mod if they want to. But if we want to go back to Rogue, we could talk about Rogue a little bit and the Wrathful Hearts that were added. Personally, I am very anti-Barber. I dislike it.
I'd high five you right now if I could.
I refuse to use the Barber on any of my builds, and I am so happy this patch actually fixed playing in a group with somebody that has the Barber, because I flat out refused to group up with people if they had the Barber on. I remember early in the season not knowing what Barber did, and I went to a world boss and I just couldn't do damage because my builds focus on poison damage, and if you're a damage over time build, if you're going up against something that has Barber applied, it basically nukes your damage to next to nothing because it's constantly resetting the damage over time every time the timer goes off. So it's just awful for the build that I play, at least, and it just doesn't feel good. But there are ways to build around it on Rogue. Because Barber shadow damage, you can kind of synergize with some of your shadow passives, and it can end up being pretty good, but it's just not fun for me to play. I don't use it. The Wrathful Heart that I've kind of geared more towards is the Vile Apothecary. I like that one a lot for Nightmare Dungeons. So I play Twisting Blades, so I'm getting a large number of hits, and I really only need about, one or two of those to proc. And when you're getting your Vile Apothecary proc, you're getting all of your imbuements applying at once: cold, shadow, and poison. The benefit of applying your shadow is huge AoE damage when they die and explode. It kind of is a pseudo Barber effect for anyone that doesn't play Rogue. The original Barber was kind of, this shadow imbue that once an enemy dies, it does a nice little shadow explosion, just like Barber, and kind of kills everything in its path. So that's really great, adding to like the AoE diversity that a rogue, maybe like a poison focused rogue, never had before. So I really like that. Not only that, but the cold imbue actually really adds to your CC as well. So just with this one Wrathful Heart, you are now able to get additional CC, additional damage through poison, and additional AoE damage through your shadow imbue, all with the one heart of Vile Apothecary. So that's actually my favorite. I know if you looked up a stat sheet of which Wrathful Hearts are being used, you'd probably see the majority using Barber, but this is where I'm going for my general content farming, is Vile Apothecary.
Dude,
for Lilith, a lot of people know my Lilith build, creeping death for damage over time. If you're trying to do single target, but otherwise, Vile Apothecary is where I'm at.
So, lucky, I got the numbers actually on the Barber. So apparently around 29.7% use the Barber, 27, a little bit less, 27.1% Vile Apothecary.
Okay, so not so bad.
That's not too bad. I mean, it's leaning into the poison effect though, right? Because I think that got a lot of traction on Reddit pretty quickly after the patch. That like if you're playing Barber and you're doing poison, you're doing it wrong. So I think that maybe that adjusted quite a lot of people.
Yeah, I think there's different builds out there. I mean, Sorcerer and Barbarian, the Barber.
It's not even close, right? It's like the interesting one on the Vile Apothecary. Like I'm there with Lucky on that. I run it as well because at the moment like I'm doing a triple imbue build. and you just basically you permacycle imbues. It makes a bit more sense for like Barrage, because Barrage, like the shots go out quicker, right? Whereas Twisted Blades, they're a bit more prolonged, so two imbuements make more sense. But like the crazy part as well is like that number that it's showing in that picture isn't even accurate. It's like I think you can get up to 90%.
Up to 90% with a tier 5, yeah.
It's absolutely bonkers. It's still a 5 to 15% chance, but also
No,
like,
I'm sorry. No, you can get up to 100%.
oh, sorry, it's like
actually.
100. Yeah, sorry.
With tier 5, it goes up to 100.
That's
With
right.
the tier 4, it goes up to 90. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm on the tier 4 one right now, and it's pretty bonkers if you think about it. I've even like been free crafting the idea of taking the new aspect with the poison imbued punctures and doing a weird thing which is going to sound sinful, which is maxing out basic skill, right? And then just kind of stacking poison through that and cycling with poison imbuement cores. But I admit that this is a pretty fun heart. I don't know about you, but I'd love to go around the circle from different classes' perspectives. I almost feel like when I'm looking at hearts right now, I genuinely wish I had a like rare item that could change the color of the socket, because I feel like the only type of heart I want that isn't a raffle is an orange heart.
Well, there's actually I think the Revenge Heart is a really, really powerful one for like Nightmare Dungeon pushing or just survivability in general. And it's universal to any class. I think there are not many places where you can just get a straight up 20% damage reduction
That's true,
aspect for the cost of I mean the cost of a ring slot is even less than than like a legendary aspect. So if you do have to have a blue, socket, definitely throw Revenge in there. I think KP is going to bring it up on the screen here, but
yeah, I'm butchering this search for it, but I think we found it. Yeah, so it's the one that, yeah, I remember the one you're talking about now, and it's like it's kind of weird because when I first read this, I was like, so what's the deal? If I don't like disperse, do I not get the damage reduction? But it is just genuinely up to a 20% damage reduction, right?
it's straight up damage reduction. Yeah, 20% damage reduction if you get a nice roll. And then there's some inconsequential damage, but it's actually, I mean, it depends. Like I use it more actually as a utility sometimes because it is a nice little explosion. Whereas, Rogue, at least Twisting Blade Rogue, doesn't have a great AoE on initial hit. With Exploit, the initial hit will cause everything to be vulnerable. This actually gives you a nice controlled explosion that you can use whenever you use your subterfuge. So I use Poison Trap, but if you're not using a subterfuge skill, I don't know if you'd actually be able to use the secondary effect, but I'll go in, I'll do a nice little explosion and it'll vulnerable everything around me. I'll have to apply it like one at a time. So it's a nice little utility you can get from it in addition to the just straight up damage reduction. So if you're a squishy class, you're not using it, throw it on.
Mekalb, do you feel like all the colored hearts have been born equal, or do you feel like there's maybe an unwanted child out of the three types?
Well, yeah, I think one of the issues with Barb is you can kind of keep up with damage with other classes. You just have to kind of give up all of your defensive or utility type of spells. And I just feel like this is kind of an extension of it with you want to do more damage. You just, like as a Barb, you want to do that. But you have to give up a defense skill. And then if you die every other dungeon or something, you lose all that time that you might have saved up. So I don't know. When I look at the Barb hearts, I think they're all pretty good. I mean, they're certainly not bad. They certainly help Barb do better, but I just have trouble finding the balance of damage versus defense. So kind of to answer your question, I don't really know. I mean, you want to do more damage. So that's probably what I lean more towards.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, sorry, I was just gonna say quickly because I was thinking what you were saying about the grasp earlier is like maybe a cheap fix for that. What if you had like an option to get a stun when you grasp pull in? Was it called grasp? The barbarian variant?
Steel grasp.
Yeah, it's steel grasp. Maybe that would kind of fix a lot of the survivability issues. Like I know stun is kind of usually looked at and kind of cringed a bit because unless it's something like you can proc every 3 or 4 seconds, it can kind of feel underwhelming. But I'm trying to think of like cheap, quick fixes because or maybe the bigger issue is like if we go for a very big WoW solution to vulnerable, my kind of concern is there's already been wordings coming out from Blizzard that they don't like the way vulnerable and crit functions right now, and we can see that in the nerfs that they gave Season 1.
Yep.
It sounds like they're planning a complete rework, but I guess as a Barb main, maybe the big concern for you, Mekalb, is like how long is that rework? Like similar to Resistances and how long we've been waiting for that. Like how far away is this?
Yeah, you can kind of feel them that they really don't want to just give Barb vulnerability on every hit or keep it up AoE or solo all the time. But to kind of answer your question about the stun, there is that new aspect that you can throw in your boots. It's called Audacity. And when there's the 5 close enemies, every 20 seconds, it'll stun them for 2 to 4 seconds. So I tried to do it, and it didn't feel bad. I just think when you have an end game build, unless you're like Thorns, I think for all other builds, Steel Grasp just kind of feels janky. Like it feels like, because if I talk in like an anecdotal type of way, I feel like when you get to the end game with any character, you should be able to get everything all the time.
Yeah.
Like everything should just fit together, should, come full circle, and you should be able to not have to use Steel Grasp as a cheap way to get Berserking up or a cheap way to get Vulnerable up. That's how I feel anyway. That's why I use Steel Grasp right now, for example, but it doesn't feel like an in-game build to me.
Yeah, I think this speaks to like kind of my idea earlier. Just you should be able to spend aspect slots to get the utility that you need. But it could also just be caked into your build, and the negatives of those builds can be compensated by other uniques. So whatever you need, you should be able to fill these aspects that you just kind of imprint or are unique. I'm kind of interested in these balance patch notes, Mekalb, because you have something like Double Swing, which got a 25% damage buff. The least used core ability. Like, what would it take to get Double Swing useful? Like, it doesn't sound like it's necessarily the damage, even though it's like really melee and cleave isn't too great. But like, what would you need to give Double Swing to like make it usable?
Yeah, it's an interesting buff. I just don't feel like it's quite enough. When we first got to like level 100 and everyone was like really interested in Lilith, I remember like kind of what turned me off at the beginning is I didn't try any of the exploits to kill Lilith. I thought that was like a really cheap way to go with the game and use a strategy around it. So I missed the whole whirlwind and some of the Hoda where you could just annihilate Lilith really fast that they kind of hot fixed. So I tried stuff like Double Swing, and Double Swing. The issue with Double Swing is you're missing out on like a big aspect. With Hoda, you get a massive AOE, and you use your whole build to just funnel into this one spell. With Whirlwind, it's you get that aspect where after a couple seconds you increase your critical strike by 50%. Those are really big aspects. But the only one that really is focused that is tailored to Double Swing is like you get little dust devils that form behind the target you hit, and that type of stuff. It just none of it works for Barb. So I feel like the 25% buff. I think it'll help. It might be an okay Lilith fight, or I really don't know if it'll last really in like hard Nightmare dungeon pushes, but I just feel like it's missing that one big aspect that all the other meta builds seems to have. So I think as a leveling build, I think Double Swing might actually be on par with all the others, but I'm skeptical about endgame even with these buffs.
I guess like one of my concerns is, we talk about these uniques, we talk about certain skills, right? Like in the viability of different builds. Like, is there maybe a feeling that there should be an alternative type of content to grind to level up, right? Like at a certain, like maybe 50, 60, you start to get to a point where bosses or much like tankier, smaller density mobs can be as viable as like going this, cluster duck of 50 on the screen at once. Because like, I think that was like one of my pet peeves with season 1 and the discoveries around what's his name, Varnash, I think it is. Like his name is so irrelevant to me, I don't even remember it already. Like the new boss they added is like I was hyped because I thought we were getting a new Uber, so more bossing content, more cool like different builds to strategize around, and then I was gutted to discover he caps at level 80, right? And it's like even if you do beat these big bosses, you don't get like big XP bursts or anything, right? So is there maybe a feeling that an alternative content avenue instead of it just being this build has great AoE there, ergo I'm good at clearing dungeons and leveling fast? Could that be a creative way to maybe provide different viable builds for barbarians and other underrepresented, like non-meta classes?
I would have liked that a lot if that was the reality. I just don't know if it is for Barb specifically. Because I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, but I tried making a double swing build for Lilith, and I got that amulet that has the frenzy buffs on it. It's a unique, and they buffed it a little bit. I'm still skeptical. We can talk about why later, but I just feel like frenzy and double swing, they just fundamentally aren't good enough to even be good as single target. And I was, we were all really upset about spending so much gold early on in season 0. I respect for like a whole week, and it was like frenzy didn't work, double swing didn't work. There was a minute where I was trying to do Lilith with Lucky, and my goal was to just get Lilith staggered, and I put everything into making things stun and making me attack faster. And I watched Lucky's video come out 2 days later, and he staggered 3 times faster with me while doing millions of damage per second. So
I was like, hey, that's a pretty good idea you got there.
so
oh
bad.
my god, you just let him lay down as a plank for you to walk over the mud on.
Yeah.
And Mekalb, man, all I'm gonna say is I'm seeing these notes here. I think you just started respeccing too soon, my friend. They have at least made this cheaper. I know, like, let's try to round out our class specific things. We spent a long time on Barb. I think like maybe me and Lucky can quickly drill into Rogue. Like we've already hit on some of these things, but like related to the improvements we saw, is there anything that's got you doing cartwheels? I imagine as like a poison focused person, this poison trap has to be one of the more significant changes, right?
I was surprised that they buffed that. I'm not sure what they're
Yeah.
trying to do with traps. They're trying to make traps viable all on their own, but I mean, I'll take more damage where I can get it. I wasn't upset with where Poison Trap was performing. I used it in my build regardless, so if it's gonna do a little bit extra damage, that's fine with me. I think for you, KP, maybe Forceful Arrow, the change there brings that one back to the table. I don't know if you're. I know a lot of the range rogues use puncture as well,
Yeah.
even though it's kind of a skill that uses your daggers. But
I have
what
to
are your thoughts on that?
I have to pretend they're small bows, Lucky. Okay, don't say they're daggers to me. It drives me crazy. I've tried a pure bow. I think if there's any skill that's going to get to a viable point for late game for Rogue out of the two, it's actually not going to be Forceful Arrow. It would be Heart Seekers. So I would have liked to have seen something tweaked around there. One of the big issues on why you can't run a basic bow skill is that the attack speed on crossbows sucks. That's why. And so, like, I get that they try to make bows more relevant with this new unique, but it's the distance modifier that stops you from being able to do that in environments where you can't stay distant. So, like, this change to me, I don't think it's worth it. I think the only value that you ever got from Forceful Arrow is proccing vulnerable. But A, Puncture can do that better, and B, once you get to, like, your glyphs, you can get the ability to proc vulnerable everywhere anyway, right? So it becomes a
Well, you
kind of
can
moot
only do
point.
one at a time with puncture, but if
Yes.
this is now piercing, you could apply it in theory to a larger area
That is true.
before you have exploit.
Yes, but once you have exploit, like this is irrelevant. So like my concern is this is never going to be relevant hyper late game, and earlier on like puncture is just better until they fix the way bows function. I agree with the buff to caltrops. Like I mean, I tried caltrops near the start. I think a bigger issue with caltrops, they actually need to change. They need to make it a vector skill base so that you can essentially choose the direction you cast it in and choose how far away you jump, and it needs to be like twice the speed of animation because. Like you've tried it, right?
So
It's so clunky.
they buffed that. This is the second buff to Caltrop. So the first one, they gave it 15% cast speed, and now they're giving it you do more damage to enemies in the Caltrops even more. So I don't know if people care about that, but they might want.
I think caltrops were a little bit sleeper ahead of this patch, and maybe a significant damage buff could see them added to more builds. So I think that's an interesting change to keep your eye on.
Here's a question for you, KP. Right?
Okay.
So you're the bow guy, right? You're the uh, so you have rapid fire, right? I remember playing around with rapid fire
Oh
for a
no,
while.
I gave up on
But
that.
you're like, it doesn't have any cleave, right? That's the problem. It does tons of boss damage, right? Or am I crazy?
So rapid fire, there's a few ways you can make it viable against multiple enemies. You can get the ricochet aspect. That gives you kind of a little bit of AoE, and then you have to go shadow imbuement. But if you're not
Right.
doing that, you're basically
So
single target.
so we got a buff to victimize, where your lucky hit chance
Mhm.
now, like your hit things cleave. What does victimize need to be at to make or like to make rapid fire useful?
So
Like
ra-
how high do you have to buff victimize before rapid fire
so
can gain any AoE?
I think rapid fire has it's either an 18 or 20%. I think it's an 18% lucky hit chance by default, and that's per arrow. So each arrow you fire out has an 18% chance. So you're almost you're like what, an 8% chance per arrow fired to victimize. It's not bad, and right now I feel like more so than season 0, rogues are focusing on scaling lucky hit because you kind of have to more so. And I know Lucky will know this feeling because of this change right here. You basically have to get
Hmm.
lucky hit so badly, it's ridiculous. So,
Yeah, they
oh, go ahead. Sorry, Lucky.
no. If we're talking about siphoning strike, because I think this is the kind of the biggest skill that at least the most popular skill that is used, passive skill specifically, that got a change in this ladder, and this was more of a correction rather than anything else. I think they really nerfed siphoning strike fairly significantly in the previous change, and this was a little bit of a makeup. The reason I don't like having it still be reliant on lucky hit is that this was sort of one of the main ways that Rogue was able to survive in the early game, but you just simply cannot stack enough lucky hit for this to be even even a viable option when you're playing early. Like once you're in the late game and you can build up all of your lucky hit affixes on respective gear, and I've always been I've always built a lot of my characters around lucky hit, so it wasn't really an issue for me in the late game. Like I still felt siphoning strike work, and now it's gonna work a little bit better than it had previously, but it doesn't really open it up or have it be a viable option for early game. So it really just made the late game a little bit better, but didn't address what I think the bigger issue is, which is early game rogue.
So something I did discover that really helped the survivability, because I remember you talked about this like in the race. You had a really big issue keeping up with. I think Vitruth ended up being the only one in the group who could keep going, right? Like everyone else's build was either like suffering damage issues or survivability issues, in the RWF season 1. So like someone I felt that pain too, like even more so because like for anyone who's tried doing Barrage Rogue in my opinion is the single best ranged build in late game. It could potentially even contest with your melee choices. But it sucks early on, really badly. It needs certain aspects, it needs to be able to proc, it needs ricochets, always coming out, so you need crit chance scaling. And like you're definitely not going to get this lucky hit procking to your benefit. One thing I found that helped, and this is where this buff is decent, but I don't know if it's enough. I feel like it could go up to 60% to be reasonable. Is Victimize. If you get the aspect that heals you when you proc Victimizers, I can't remember the name of the aspect, but I think Lucky, you know the one I'm talking about, right? It's like I think it's every time you can proc on a Victimize, you heal X amount of health. It's a pseudo lifesteal. And if Victimize gets buffs like this, you can sustain yourself through the mid leveling process off of that. I've forgotten the name. Sorry, boys. It's like it's like I used it for the leveling process. I'll remember it when I see it, but I'll never remember the name of it. But it's like I like the idea of Victimize kind of bridging this gap, and Siphoning Strike maybe just being a late game addition to the build, and used initially like basically when you move on from Victimize, because the reality is you don't want to be pushing Victimize when you're like level 80 90, right? You should have enough AoE at that point to benefit from something like crit chance and crit damage increases or just raw scaling. But that was my take on it. It's like Victimize seems to be being pitched as this new mid game, like Blizzard's apologizing for what they've done to Siphoning Strikes, but it requires you to spec still, and that also requires a specific aspect that if you're unlucky, you may never see in time.
Cruel sustenance, I think.
That sounds about right. I think it's like every time you proc victimize explosions, you heal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's decent. I used it as like I was struggling to survive. I was falling apart, and then I got that on, and even with a crappy barrage incomplete build, I was like, huh, health pool never goes below half. Not bad. Not bad. Just to round out Rogue quickly, because I think my feeling is these didn't change too much for me. I don't know if you felt the same, Lucky. Like, I still really want to try some sort of cool smoke grenade build, but I'm not seeing it with the changes to aspect of quickening fog. This feels like maybe a optional final piece if you have a spare aspect slot, but not. It doesn't feel like there's any build where this is mandatory, right?
No, I think they were just targeting completely unused unused aspects here, and they thought they were making a change that might help. Maybe down the road it'll synergize with something else, but I don't think with the existing items we have that there's much room to run with this quickening fog or elusive menace. I don't see them being very impactful.
And then the uniques, like, I mean, the wind force change was a logical one. Like, all stats, please, vulnerable damage. At least a bow's a little bit better. And then rounding out the rogue changes. I mean, it's kind of nice, right? Where the Hakana getting a buff. This is the unique amulet that applies all your imbuements to Rain of
Rain of
Arrows.
Arrows, which there was, I think we might have skipped over that one,
We
but
skipped
there
over
was
it for good
the
reason.
knockdown. The cooldown is just
So
so
bad.
long on Rain of Arrows. It is
Oh.
such a cool skill though. Like
Yes.
it is actually a really cool skill. One of the cooler animations of I think all the rogue skills in the game, but it is god awfully slow with the cooldown, and it's just not worth being able to use a move once every minute, even
I
if
have
it
one.
is
I'm trying to
a
see
cool
if I
looking skill that can deal some damage. But I mean, if like they're trying to build, you have a whole unique amulet aspect around this skill, right? You buffed it. You're gonna give up a whole aspect slot for a move that you can only use once every minute. It's just not. Nobody's gonna do that.
and a buffed aspect spot, right? Because it's necklace, which is a
Yeah.
1.5 times modifier. So usually you want that for like edge masters if that's not on your primary, something like that. I agree though. My issue is the animation's way too long. It's way too high of a cooldown. Like if it was a 30-second cooldown, maybe we can talk, right? Then I'm like, you could do a pretty cool preparation build. But I think if there is a number one culprit for me wanting a separate ultimate slot skill as a 7th slot, this is probably the ultimate that makes me want that. Because
That'd be cool.
I can't think, like, is there a worse ultimate in the game right now? Like, we got decent.
Freeze?
Say again.
Deep freeze.
You think deep freeze is deep freeze really worse than Rain of Arrows?
I mean, no matter what they do to deep freeze, no one wants to use it.
Okay.
Like, you can give it all the damage in the world, no one's going to pick that button up.
I feel like the only reason people pick Rain of Arrows is because of what Lucky said. It looks cool. It's like, wow, you know that kind of flashy. You know what it reminds me of? Rain of Arrows reminds me of the Indiana Jones movie where the guy in the desert where he like does all the fancy like blade tricks. He's like showing off, and then Indy just pulls out a gun and shoots him. It's like that. That's Rain of Arrows versus any actually good build. It's sad. But overall, yeah, not drastic. Not many drastic changes to Rogue. I guess one that could be interesting to get into. I don't know if we have a full-on Druid specialist, but I'm sure you guys have took note of this. Any big thoughts around the Druid changes?
They keep trying to buff companions, and it's not going anywhere. They're trying. Look, I have like a thought process where I look at them trying to balance all these underused skills, right? They're making certain quality of life things like Earth Spike gives more spirit. The Earth Spike's being used, so even though it's being used, and Storm Strike, the most used basic for a druid, they're all just giving you more resources because it's not fun to be unable to spend your resources. Yeah. But eventually there comes a point where the thing that isn't being used keeps getting buffed, and the thing that is used doesn't move, and they meet. And the question is, what is it going to take for those things to meet? Because that's generally how I view these games. They have, I assume, a bunch of data scientists and data analysts up at Blizzard, and they're just looking at what are people using. And they say, these things aren't being used, let's buff them. And that's kind of been the trend that I've been noticing. Just whatever isn't being used, they just keep buffing. They're not necessarily targeting how do we make the synergies work. How do we just buff it to the point of where it's used? And so I keep going back to stuff like wolves. Like, all right, they gave it a huge amount of damage. They gave the wolves more damage. At what point in time is it going to get used? And I don't know. We need a druid specialist in the chat.
We
At
do.
what point
we got like 2 rogues. We got a
is it going to
necro.
take?
We'll get to necro soon. Don't worry. But like I guess to that thought, what you just described there goes back to the discussion that I don't think we need to beat the dead horse because we had a good one on it already. But like Mekalb led us into initially the thoughts around uniques, right? And then we expanded that into uniques and aspects should open ways for new builds. And this feels misguided. Like stat buffs are nice, but maybe the issue is we need more unique interactions, gameplay mechanics via aspects and specifically uniques to unlock the full potential of things like companions.
I don't agree. I think we become too much like Diablo 3 at that point, where you are locking, a build behind a unique item that drops, right? We were just complaining about it at the beginning of the call. You don't want to have to be reliant on, Penitent Griefs to drop for your build to come online. And there aren't a whole lot of builds that function that way, at the moment. But if you're locking builds behind a unique item, at least it's just it's nice when the item drops. But if you are very passionate about playing, a summon druid, and that's the class that you want to play with, you should be able to at least clear, at a somewhat decent rate until the item drops, and then maybe you really take off. But the fact is, at the moment, it's just completely unviable, no matter what you have. So I think you can't lock a really strong build behind just one item coming online, because it removes the ability for a player to play the game how they want to play. I think everything should be viable at a certain level, right? If we're saying it'll clear at like the C tier speed at the moment, maybe the unique item brings it up to an A tier and you can clear a little bit better. But right now, summons are like F tier. So everything should be baseline C tier without having that really, really good unique drop, and then maybe bring it up from there. So finding the right balance on your actual skill tree, I think can help with players being able to play their way without having builds locked behind items.
I guess maybe my thought was like maybe not as much uniques, that's a bad representation, but aspects feel like they should kind of turn builds into new things, right? Like Twisted Blades functions that way, where it gets
if they're codex aspects, I'm all for it.
Yeah, that was my kind of thought. Like, do you feel the same, Mekalb? Do you think that's maybe the way that a lot of these underwhelming builds for barbs, necros with their summons, or obviously companions for druids could be resolved?
Yeah, I think that's a really good perspective that Lucky has. Because like with barbs, I don't really think like any unique really enables the build. I think you can kind of get by with all of them. I don't even know if you get 2 tiers, but maybe you'd get 1 tier better if you had like a really good unique for maybe like Gore's Gloves that makes your whirlwind pulse every 2 seconds. Maybe that makes the build a tier better, half a tier better. I kind of agree with that. And I know that, specifically when we were doing the race, I made my whole build around Codex so that I know that no matter what, by level 60, if Barb could have, I would have been able to have, everything I need to have an endgame build. And I don't think that existed, but I think ideally I agree with that everything should be a C or a B tier type of a build. And if you want to min-max it, you have 3 or 4 builds ready and the one unique drops and you utilize it. I think that's what I love about Diablo is you have that RNG in it, and if you're prepared, you should be able to use the RNG. And right now we're just kind of gated behind this is the best spec. You just have to hope for gear that agrees with the best spec.
Yeah, I feel that like that was a weird thing for me. Is season 0, I use Umbrus a lot in my builds, and Umbrus is not a codex. And I think across all my time in season 0, which is an embarrassing amount of hours, I don't want to disclose it. I think I got like 2 Umbruses drop the entire time. But then like within 8 hours this season, I had 4 Umbruses in my inventory. It's a wild experience, man. But like the cool thing I think about Umbrus as an example is like it isn't build defining; it's complementary, right? And I think it's cool to have more aspects like that. But it should feel like it does something drastically different. So for those who don't know what Umbrus does, on lucky hit, if you crit, it allows you to generate Dark Shrouds. So the cool thing about that is you can essentially have it function as a 7th skill because you don't have to equip it to your bar. You can just get this damage reduction and also movement speed without ever needing to equip the skill. That's a cool idea to me. It's like it's not fundamental for a build to exist, but it does something nice. And I feel like, especially around summons in general, it's kind of that feeling. Like Necro had a lot of complaints around this as well, right? Like, we're talking about how Tendril and Bone Spear is really the tip-toppity shape. But a lot of people kind of, especially I remember in season 0, even more so, they voiced their concerns of like, I as a Necro have no use for minions at high level, right? And maybe there could be more lean in on aspect options. I wonder if maybe there's an element in Blizzard's mind of like, if we introduce more aspects, it makes the game more confusing, and we don't want it to be confusing because you can kind of tell they were trying to not be Path of Exiles in that regard, right?
Well, I actually have a different opinion about ads, minions from a necromancer. People have this mindset where minions are an all or nothing thing. Like, I need to have a giant army or nothing, and then I'll get like the sacrifice aspect. But the minions really aren't designed in that way. The minions are really designed where you have to invest in a minion. I mean, not only do they take skill points, but they also take a glyph. They take specific, mods potentially. I mean, there's very few mods on your gear in this game compared to Path of Exile. Path of Exile, you get 6 mods. This game, you only get 4. I mean, there's much fewer in this game. So you really have to kind of invest. I mean, if you want to pick skeleton warriors up, I mean, they die, but they did buff your priest healing. There are ways to kind of build it. So I think you just kind of spread yourself too thin if you go for every minion. I've been playing around with minions, and they do supplemental damage pretty good in their own way. I just think that people are just stuck with the bone spear, sacrifice everything, and then they try to get an army and it fails. Again, and this kind of goes back to my belief personally that I just think that the meta is like very unexplored, and these kind of patch notes, I look at them, they just keep buffing things, right?
Yeah.
And I still don't think people are going to explore these options, and then they're just going to keep buffing them, and then people eventually are going to realize, oh my god, after the 4th double swing buff, double swing's OP, but like it didn't stop it here, it stopped over there, right? They just kept buffing it, and people just don't really know what's good because people just don't have the tools to kind of search for what's good or explore what's good, really. Again, this is kind of why I'm building the tool. It's to help people kind of explore a bit without having to clear a million dungeons and buy the gear. But it's just really interesting because I go on some of these like trading discords as a necromancer, and I only see amulets with 2+2 evulsion. Like,
Yeah.
it's the only thing that's traded. Nobody wants a scythe. Everyone wants a 2-handed sword with crit, vul. Like, it's like, and these things are worth 200 million gold on these Discord servers, and everything else is worth nothing. And I just, again, I play around with things, and other builds seem fine as long as you can compensate for the weaknesses pretty well. So I look at these patch notes personally, and I get pretty optimistic, actually. I mean, Mekalb, maybe you can talk about charge, because they just did a bunch of random things on charge. And, the last time I looked at charge was when I programmed something in the calculator for charge, which was a while ago. But maybe charge will find a way into the meta. Who knows?
Hey, there's your vulnerable.
Have you used charge before?
Look,
They fixed
probably
it.
not since the beta.
They're fixing it in 1.1.1.1.1.
Oh, we're close, halfway there.
Yeah, so I tried a lot of different specs to try and synergize with our team for the initial push, and I tried a kick charge spec, and the first thing I noticed is it's not, you can't use charge as like a single target because it doesn't knock back. So it's like, okay, well, dungeon bosses, you're not going to do any damage to them if you can't knock them back. And then I was like, okay, maybe it's a good free AoE spell. And I already knew this, but I watched Rob play right after these came out. And he had this massive group of monsters, 50, 100 monsters just trailing him around. And he found out what I already knew, is that he charged through the middle of them and he could only get 4 or 5 max in his charge. So, and this was those notes that I sent the night before they did this campfire stream, is I said, you need to literally triple. You need to stop imagining that a bard's only catching their shoulder width worth of enemies. You need the bard to be running like this and catch everything in its grasp and throw it against a wall. So the damage definitely had merit to it, but you can't catch things with charge. So that was kind of the second thing that triggered me, is I knew that charge was so bad, and I was like, they're looking at numbers. I feel like they've never actually used the charge spell when they made these buffs.
I kind of feel that, like, so, I mean, I'm gonna get some flack for saying it. Like, pen shot gives that feeling too, right? Like, pen shot works really well for reasons other than the core skill itself just being good. Like, if you think about the width of the shot, and especially if you're not, you always have to remember to hold shift as you click it as well, because like otherwise, if you target a mob, it's boinging off into like a wall somewhere after hitting one mob, right? It's like, until you get imbuements involved in that process as a rogue, pen shot is another example of that, where it's like, this feels really thin. It'll go through as many targets as possible, but it's like, yeah, it's a bigger shot than normal, but in the grand scheme of the amount of mobs on my screen, it's baby sized, right? I think that I imagine there's other skills that have that feeling too, where it's just like, it could be epic, and you can see they're trying to avoid turning into like an anime adventure with the size of the explosions. But at the same time, you don't necessarily get the wallop you'd expect out of a lot of these core skills unless you supplement them and imbue them and empower them with like 2 or 3 different skills, which of course then it kind of funnels your build options even more, because if I'm saying you need 2 or 3 extra things in that to make it viable, we always have to remember at the end of the day, you only have 6 skills, which is like another wonky thing that I think of is like, to Josh's point of like builds not being explored, double core builds, right? There are some cool ideas I've seen out there before with double core, but when you tell it to like a very intelligent player who's like done the numbers and thought about it, their answer is always like, compared to this, no, because now I'm sacrificing an extra skill to kind of have 2 core skills do what one in theory should.
You know, something I tried a few days ago, and I made a YouTube video about it, but I took a level 35 barb and I just did a loop around Cordragon, and I tested how fast I could get through like each of the little camps throughout the whole stronghold. And I threw double swing in there as a meme, and I was kind of happy to see it actually in the patch notes, because it does need more damage, but I threw it in there and it actually ended up winning. It was my meme. It was supposed to be like my baseline, bottom line build, and it won by like 3 seconds. It beat out Hoda and Rand and Upheaval and stuff. So, and the weird thing about that, and I appreciate that what your comment about the double maxing out double core is, I think a lot of that is, yeah, it's unexplored territory. And I think that extra 4 or 6 or you max out is like 7 points for a whole nother core spell. I think stuff like that is largely unexplored, and maybe like an Upheaval and a double swing build could work. Just, you don't actually need all of those extra points into those passives that really in the scheme of things aren't that substantial. Like, they might make you a little harder to die or hit a little harder, but having a whole nother spell for like, I can kill dungeon bosses without throwing this big AoE, I can use double swing, which is meant for, single target. So I do plan on testing a double core build soon and seeing how that'll work.
No.
We've been trying to model weapon swapping in our calculator.
Okay.
And only around now have we like really gotten it to work, because we get the rates at which you swap weapons, right? So we run the rates at which you use abilities, and abilities have a weapon tied to them, and but we don't really have the ability on the website to assign a weapon onto a skill, which is kind of like the fundamental problem right now. But the other thing was, for a while we just didn't really hard code that you need to use this weapon with this skill. We just kind of like left it aside with the weapon swapping and went to other things, and then we came back to it because now we have this ability to kind of look at the rates of things. So we're able to do weapon swapping a lot more justice than we could a month ago on the calculator. And there was also a period of time where just if the calculator didn't know to do something as an option, you just couldn't cast anything. All your cooldowns are down, and you don't have any resources, and you don't have a basic. It just kind of like sat there, but it kind of like didn't know what to do, so it kind of bugged out. But we gave it the option to kind of like wait. Like if you have nothing else to do, it just kind of like gives it a second. So that was another problem because we weren't weapon swapping, which gives you rage, and then we weren't giving it the option to just kind of chill. But we're working on giving weapon swapping a bit more justice. So I don't know, maybe that'll help kind of give people the option.
It's definitely useful because, like, I mean, I've been conceptualizing a bunch of builds. The calculator is really handy in that regard. And like for those wondering, like, there's no API access. All the calculations done. I mean, that guy on my side, like him and his bro, have just basically been going through and recording data, logging data, figuring out how different things interact, and kind of integrating that calculator. So it's a lot of work. And I think one thing I was noticing is like we were talking the other day, Josh, about how like the calculator was struggling with the idea of like if you don't have a basic skill, how are you generating like energy or combo points, right? And it's like things like that are getting added in over time because there's loads of unique interactions. It's like I imagine double core skills will have some interesting implications there. One thing
that was really my fault.
Yeah.
That was really just my fault. I was playing the betas, and I'm like, oh, you have a builder and a spender, so like, we can kind of use this as the baseline for the calculator. And they were like, well, what about the builds that don't have a builder? And I'm like, yeah, just forget about that for a while. And then it circled back, and I'm like, all right, yeah, now, comeuppance, right?
Yeah.
Is that the right word?
But the cool thing is like how quickly like the adaptation comes through, right? To kind of pivot and try to resolve those issues. Like I remember we had like I think we adjusted one where like I took puncture out of my build, and the build was like, you can't do anything anymore. It's like technically I can, but then, with like shadow imbuement to generate energy and innovate. But it's interesting because like there are ways you kind of conceptualize like almost basic skills are required. But I know for like rogues, a perfect example, one way you can ignore basic skills is rapid fire builds, right? Because you can self-sustain off of energy generation via the enhanced passive. But one thing I do want to focus on, because I'm trying to get us gradually through it, because we will get to your necro, Josh. Right? You already hit on it some,
okay.
but I feel like we've got to tackle this. Mekalb's probably gonna have some mixed feelings, like because it kind of feels like Sorcerer got decent buffs. And this whole patch was meant to be about sorcerers and barbarians skipping through the meadows happily. Does it kind of feel like the sorcerer got to do that while the barbarian had to stay at home?
I just think they kind of missed the mark. I mean, all the buffs, they'll make a difference. They're decent. I just, when they started off with like the Hellhammer and increasing the basic attacks, giving a little more fury, I just kind of thought, I don't have fury problems, and no matter what, I'm still going to put the same fury building spells in. Regardless if it's 11 or 13. So I don't know. I saw Sork and I was super unhinged, I'll be honest. It kind of got better because I focus primarily on speedrunning, and Sorks were the queen of speedrunning, and now Necro's kind of taken over. But I just knew that Sork, whatever issues they have doing Lilith, I mean they were pretty busted there for a minute, and the big debuff was doing like 3 times extra damage when they were staggered or whatever.
Oh yeah, I remember watching that. It was like if you had enough, like there was I can't remember his name. There's a guy season 0 where he was doing the stagger build, and his goal was then in one stagger to kill Lilith, right? Hit or miss. Sometimes it worked out really well, but I guess I can kind of feel your pain because I don't know. Were you feeling this when you scrolled through Lucky? Like compared to what we looked at Barb, it feels like they really tried with Sorcerer. You know what I mean? Like the amount of different things that got tweaked and buffed.
I think Sorcerer was the first class in Season 1 to clear a Tier 100 Nightmare Dungeon.
Yeah.
They were the fastest class in the early game. Those 4 Sorks
Oh,
absolutely
Charm
like were
Squad?
shredding. Yeah. In the early game, like they were, I think, 10 levels ahead of us at some point. We caught up because they fell off at some point. But regardless, like Sorks are doing pretty good this season, and they clearly got the best of patch 1.1.1. Whereas I think if you look at the other end of the spectrum, Barbarian, for all the reasons Mekalb said, we don't have to rehash them. Just feels like they could use a little bit of the Sork treatment. But hey, this is a Diablo game. Sork has to be the best character, right? I think, they said they want to stay true to Diablo 2, and Sork's the best character in Diablo 2, and they're just, trying to rehash those memories, and Sork OP.
It was like when the stats came out for season 0, wasn't Sorcerer the most popular class? Didn't it have like 40% of the player base?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
So I guess I'm kind of not surprised, but I would have thought like was Barb second most popular in season 0? Because I feel like Barb has always been a class that people have looked towards in Diablo.
I think it was. I know that like the first 100s, I think like half of them were barbs. So
Yeah.
a lot of at least the more elite players played barbs in season 0, and it completely fell off in season 1.
Now, speaking of the opposite of that, rounding out looking at the changes to the classes, we have to talk about the Necromancer a little bit. We hit on it a little bit already. I guess Josh, going to you, you mentioned a bit around Bone Spear, as you
Yeah.
wanted people to move away from that.
I might
ahead.
have like a bit of a unique insight into the particular changes with this
Mhm.
because I'm actually running a dot build that uses Wither, unlike
Oh.
everyone else. There are some other Shadow Necromancers out there, so it's not completely amazing. But I've been running a Shadow Blight related build, and it is insane. It does absurd damage. I basically have 5 ghosts, and they also proc my Shadow Blights. And the way Shadow Blight works is you tick up applications of damage, and then when I do 10 ticks of Shadow Blight, I get a huge buff, and I put that on my 2-hander, and so that gives me 240% damage for 6 seconds. It's a massive multiplier. And some of that also goes to the 5 mages, and everything just kind of applies Shadow Blight. Now, the way dots kind of operate in this game with puddles is that puddles stack, but they tick at the same time. So if I throw 4 blights out at a mob, it'll do 4 times the damage, but it'll have the same tick rate. So in order to kind of get that Shadow Blight up, I have to apply many different types of shadow damage. But the reason Blight was really good compared to something like Sever was because Sever just doesn't really apply that much Shadow Blight compared to Blight, which just puts the damage on them and just sits there and gives you a bunch of other things. Mobilizes, it slows, it does all that other stuff. But here they buffed Wither, and I did some napkin math, and before it gave around 9% damage. Now it gives like 15%, 14, 15%, depending on your willpower. So it's like a 5% damage buff. That's kind of cool. And Sever, before it was whenever you had to crit with Sever on this aspect of empowering Reaper. No one really used this, because why would you ever want a dot on a crit build? It didn't make any sense. But now it's just a chance without critting. Which is actually pretty good, because that's more applications to get Shadow Blight. Shadow like pools on the floor for Shadow Blight. And there's actually there's another thing for that as well for Sever. So Sever has 2 applications on the floor for dots, which is really good for Shadow Blight. So there's some potential there. And then they buffed Aspect of Decay, which is Shadow Blight. So they really kind of leaned into this shadow damage over time idea that is kind of low-key pretty damn good. As for the other things, there's not that much. But yeah, that's kind of my look.
I've got a question for you. So you've talked a lot about around the numbers and the theoretical stuff. Have you found that all of the numbers agree with the numbers on the sheet versus like in game? And I'll give an example real quick. I heard somewhere that Barb, the Fury numbers are actually a little bit better than what they say. they'll say like this basic attack does 10 fury, but someone on Reddit said it's actually like 15-20% higher than what those numbers actually say. Have you felt that as you've like built out the calculator and as if you've played the game yourself as well?
There's too many interconnecting pieces to really trust your tooltip. I mean, also as mobs get higher level, they take less damage. I mean, one of the features that we're trying to introduce into the website is a toggle, something that you can move for nightmare sigils and enemy level, because as enemies level up, they take less damage. And this is just a formula based on the enemy level. And so it's kind of not clear exactly how your damage is going to look because things are applied at different ways, right? You have triggers like we talked about upheaval, right? Puts a fiery thing on the ground. That's going to have different modifiers grouped in depending on circumstance. I mean, it could even be is the enemy an elite or not. So you really have to be kind of you need a tool to kind of expect what the damage is really going to be. It's really not about the tooltip. The tooltip is Blizzard's best estimate, but like it's never gonna be right, and because there's just too many variables. Um, I think what Blizzard does do a pretty good job at is, you scale up to the everyone's party level, right? So like if you're in a dungeon with your friend and he's 50 and you're 30, you see the 30 mob, he sees the 50 mob, but like it doesn't feel atrocious play in that environment. Obviously if the mob is 20 higher than you, one or two shot you. But like they scale it really pretty well. They have these models for how to kind of scale you decently to make it so you can play with your friends. I mean, this isn't really a factor with speedrunning too much, but uh, they did a pretty good job kind of mapping out your expected kind of performance curve. But it's not perfect, and their tooltips aren't perfect.
No.
And we're trying to make our calculator as good as it can be to kind of encapsulate those complex interactions. I mean, I don't think Blizzard will ever really put in the effort to make a Shadow Blight damage calculator, just because there's too many dots on the ground. How do they interact? But this is something I'm working on. So
That's your job.
Yeah.
yeah, that's my
I mean, you already hinted some of that. You were saying earlier, like the way that it works is when you apply new like pulls on the ground, right, with blight. It essentially, you're saying it kind of like it aligns the tick rate on each of those.
yeah. So I mean, I've heard all sorts of wonky things from people, and I had to test it out myself to understand. Um, I guess the best synopsis is: let's say I have Blizzard, and I overlap in my same spot a bunch of Blizzards,
Mhm.
right? The Blizzard's damage will keep going, right? I do one Blizzard, it's one Blizzard's worth of damage every tick. Two Blizzards worth of damage. It'll keep ramping up, right, until they start disappearing. Um, but you'll only see the damage every tick, and a tick is usually half a second. So it's like every half a second you'll see the numbers. Um, and this is pretty important for things like Shadow. Because if I overlap a bunch of the different pools, they're not applying 5 ticks on Blight. I have to overlap different pools. Um, and so then this one particular instance it's important. But largely people don't really interact with this.
Hmm.
I mean, this is kind of also how poison works, right? I remember people were saying, oh, poison works like this, poison works like that. They put down the poison trap. I don't see the damage over time. And it applies. Poison's applying, You just got to let the mob sit in it and you'll see the numbers increase, and it's just poisons applying tick after tick after tick. And if you had 2 poisons, it'll just, I guess you can't really ramp a bunch of poison traps in a row, but shadow damage you can.
Yeah, well, you can do there's an aspect that lets you do that, right? Like it's the one that lets you, when you're concealed, you can place, I think it's 5 traps and then reveal.
Yeah, that's one of the, I think, tier 100 push builds for Rogue at the moment. They just constantly spam those poison traps and knocking everything down. Pretty cool.
It's interesting to think about that kind of interaction because, like, where that applies not just with Blight, that same thing could happen with the toxin pools for rogues, right? I forget the name of the aspect, but the one where you have a proc chance to put a pool of poison on the floor.
Yeah, bursting
so-
venoms.
Bursting venoms. Yeah.
Are there anything on Rogue? I can't think of anything on my mind because Stan worked a lot on Rogue.
It's the bursting
not really
venoms we were
bad.
just saying. Like you have a
So-
chance to put a pool of poison on the floor. With
Does anything
attack.
tick from poison? Like,
Yeah.
so here's an example. Okay, so like sorcerers, burning damage can give you mana,
Mhm.
right? Is there anything like that on Rogue?
To give you mana from poison.
Like-
You don't get anything back from the tick damage. Not
There's
to
no
my.
tick related stuff.
No, the only thing
No.
there's one thing that would be the attack speed, right? I guess that could kind of classify as something you get back is as long as enemies are poisoned, you get attack speed buff. So
Yeah.
the tick
if,
won't matter there.
Yeah. If the poison is applied. Yeah.
That's the closest I can think of, though.
Yeah, I think
it's not scaling off the damage or anything that you're doing. You know, it's kind of just an effect, like if something were chilled or if something were poisoned. You know.
Now, I think it's important to. We've been talking so long. We've gone through so many things. I want to like try to get through these because, like, you know, it's kind of a heartbreaker thinking about what Mekalb was saying about the struggles as a barb already with survivability and clear speed. How are we feeling about? I'm sure we feel good about the monster density, but how are we feeling about those increase in health numbers?
Skip the bosses. if you can't kill the boss and you want to level efficiently, just skip them. You know, your glyph XP might suffer, but the increased density, that's going to be really, really nice. Maybe it makes up for the extra time you have to spend on the boss. Rogue just melts bosses, so
yeah, we don't care. We got poison. You know, like it's all good. We got vulnerable through the wazoo. Like Mekalb, is that kind of feeling now? Like maybe especially for barbs, because there's not many. I don't feel like there's that many good bossing barb builds, right? Is it kind of now?
Oh,
Skip the boss, move on.
you know what? I was probably 10 minutes into my rant YouTube video when I turned it off. I didn't even know that they increased boss life, so I'm just learning about it.
Oh no! So
so-
this is
so-
part 2.
I was making a clip a few days ago, and I invited 3 people to my party, so we had a party of 4, and I went and I did a T50 or something, Nightmare Dungeon, and I had a P4 boss, and I thought, you know, this is going to take 2 minutes to do. It's going to really demonstrate the issues with Barb, but I had Still Grasp at that point, and I noticed that it actually helps significantly with single target damage. So I think if you don't have something like that, this will be this will destroy Whirlwind if you don't have a way to get vulnerable on it. And Whirlwind's probably one of the worst specs in the game at killing bosses like this. So I don't know how I feel. They increased all of the life from 85% to 100% for each player that joins your party. Now they're doing this. But on the other side, though, I have been worried that they made every class too strong and the content too easy. So maybe this isn't quite as bad as what it looks like. I don't know.
I guess my feeling was like the mob density is cool. Should there maybe have been an increase to the XP for killing the bosses?
Yeah, I think so.
I think it's generally just more fun to complete a dungeon than it is to kind of like, you know, kind of worry about which dungeon am I doing and, you know, clearing every mob. Like, I personally just enjoy like going through types of dungeons and having new experiences. And I've been melting bosses in less than 10 seconds. So to say that I'll, you know, spend 15 seconds on a boss or 20 seconds on a boss, that gets me excited.
That's a huge increase from what you've been
I
experiencing.
might have to do a mechanic now, so I'm pretty excited.
I guess like I want bosses to feel hard, but I want it to feel rewarding to do them other than just the challenge. Because my kind of feeling is like there was a good video on this that kind of compared Poe and Diablo, and one really fair point I had to give them, like there's no disputing it, is like bosses in Path of Exiles for the most are really well designed. They have unique mechanics, they have things you have to dodge, they have different phases. My only concern with like these changes to bosses is I'm glad, I want them to be harder, but my feeling is like if they're even a minute longer, like what different mechanics are we interacting with across that minute? Because like I can't feel like there's many that I'm going to be missing out on, right? If I continue to kill them in 10 seconds compared to 2 minutes. maybe outside of the capstone boss for World Tier 3, right? Which I think is possibly the best designed dungeon boss of all of them.
I just think they need to introduce more bosses, man.
Yeah, take the
Oh, yeah.
bosses from the campaign. Like there were some actually good designed bosses that were pretty fun to fight there, and they're just totally underutilized assets. Like nobody's even running the campaign in season 1, and it was such a big part of the launch. It's kind of a shame.
Yeah, like maybe get Andariel on there would be one that comes to mind.
Yeah.
What other ones were there?
I'm probably at 1 in 100 that's actually done the campaign in season 1. So
What? Why? Why would you do that to
I
yourself?
I did a speed run, and
Oh, okay.
it's fun actually. Like yeah, Lucky makes a good point. They're really fun bosses, and I already forgot some of the mechanics, so it's not like they're super easy. They could definitely utilize it.
I think really what goes on is like everyone is so like efficiency oriented nowadays in video games.
Yeah.
Where they think in their head, okay, like I could do the campaign or I can just get renown while I level. And the idea of the RPG kind of goes away and think in terms of efficiency, time, things like that, and how do I beat this game and hit 100 as quickly as possible. So
Well,
I
I
think
think that is because of a poorly designed game that you have to make decisions like that. Like, I think if the game were designed better, you would give players more of an option to be able to play the game how they want to play. Make it so that if you do the campaign, you have a 20% experience boost, and you can actually do the campaign to start a season, then go to end game and not be far behind everyone that just skipped right to end game. Like putting us all into end game right at the start of the season took out probably the most exciting first 6 hours of the launch of the game and just put us right into the end game, which I think is a lot less developed than this campaign was, the story was. Like Blizzard did such a great job on the campaign. I think it's the best asset that the game owns at the moment. And for season 1, like everyone was super excited about the skip campaign feature, but I think that kind of ruined a lot of people's experience. Like if Blizzard wants to add time to our level 100 progression, like they nerfed our XP. That XP nerf was probably 5 or 6 hours worth of content that we had to do. And we did it all in the end game environment. If you want to add 5 or 6 hours into what I have to do, how I have to play, give me the option of using that 5 to 6 hours to play the campaign instead of doing the same thing over and over again. If that was the goal, right? And with XP nerfs, that is the only goal, is for us to play longer. Let us choose what kind of content we want to do. Maybe we can still skip to endgame if we want to, if someone really doesn't like the campaign. But if we do like the campaign, let us run it and not be behind. Let us not be behind all the people that skip, because as a competitive player, it's just not viable. You can't do it. And again, a shame, because it's really good content.
We'll give options as well, right? Like one thing
Options are never bad.
Like Helltide, right? It might not have been as optimal as Nightmare in Season 0. I don't know about you. I preferred Helltide, though. I found Helltide a very fun experience. I enjoyed the environments. I enjoyed the random encounters. It was flavor. But everything they've been doing since the release has made Helltide worse, right? They buffed Nightmare Dungeons, and they're buffing them again. They also simultaneously nerfed Helltide, right? And they're still trying to rectify bugs they've introduced there, like unintended behaviors around the amount of like cinders they're meant to drop, right? And it's like, it's the same logic I was giving to bosses, right? These bosses should give more XP, or there should be like dungeons that have less mobs, but they're harder to beat mobs compared to like comparative elites and highly dense dungeons. I think that kind of spectrum is cool. Like the idea of PvP being an environment where there's like some XP benefit there as well. Like I agree, options are never bad, and if your goal is to make this leveling process take longer, you're going to make it get more tedious if you don't provide those options. And I've already felt that tedium, because another thing that just drives me nuts is, why can't I get a Nightmare Sigil for any dungeon? Why is it only a select few are the ones I'm going to have access to through tier X to Y, right? Like we've got, how many dungeons is it in the game? It's like 120?
Mm-hmm.
How many do you get to see in the Nightmare situation? Like
30. I think they rotate. I think they do that to kind of give you a seasonal feel, especially if you're spending so much time in Nightmare Dungeons. You're just gonna feel like, but the problem with that is though, all the nightmare dungeons reuse the same assets. Like honestly, it's all the same asset. It's just maybe like a different layout. So they don't really feel all that unique at the end of the day. But I think that was their goal, at least, is to make each season feel like you have something to anchor back on. It's like, oh yeah, that's the season I ran Sirats every waking second. In launch, I ran Champion's Demise. Like this is what I associate with each season, and that's kind of, I think, the goal with rotating in and out nightmare dungeons. But I don't know if it's the best.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Lucky, about the campaign. Like Path of Exile makes you go through the campaign, and I think D4 campaign is fantastic. One of my favorite things about leveling in this game is that, like, as you develop your build, and you get aspects for your build, you kind of have to go with build, right? You have to invest gear, you have to invest aspects, you have to put work towards your build, and swapping off your build, and you're doing Nightmare Sigil 50 or higher, it's not that easy. But in the early game, you can swap on a dime. You're like, I don't like this anymore, I'll swap to Hammer of the Ancients. Oh, I don't like that anymore, I'll go Whirlwind. I can swap before a boss fight for nothing. And that's one of the things I like about the campaign and like early game in general. It's just like, you know, you can just play around a lot more. And when you're kind of just farming renown, it's less fun in the early game. And, you know, I think that's something they make you do in Path of Exile, and they could just easily bring it here. I also think there's just not enough dopamine triggers in Diablo.
Yeah.
A game like Path of Exile, you have crafting. And so people who like to craft and play around and trade, there's a lot of like ways to get a lot of exciting moments that really get you excited. And Diablo, there's not enough of that. Like moments of just like, oh my god, I can't believe that happened.
Hey,
Like, when was the last time you had that reaction?
leveling until 80 to get Penitent Greaves. Yeah.
Oh my god.
Oh my god! It finally happened. But I agree on that. Like, that reminded me of one thing that came up as a discussion point on Race War First Season 1's broadcast is like, corrupted. What about corrupted items? Right? What about the option to do that? Where, you know, like Path of Exiles has that type of system, right? Where you can corrupt it, and it'll like change some of the stats, but you can't re-roll again, right? It's a gamble system, sure. Some people are not going to like it, but like, I think it's a creative way of extending the best in slot process. Like, for me, it feels like they kind of tried to do that to a small degree with the way Malignant Heart slots work, right? Where you get different colored ones. But because there's no gamble I can take to try and change that, or some like extra layer other than, well, you just got to grind potentially 3 times longer to get the best in slot, I didn't feel as good about that process as I would compared to like games where you almost just go up to the roulette table with your good item. You're like, it's either going to be better or it's going to the vendor. One of the two.
You must have never gotten really unlucky with enchants.
Oh,
I've got like 40 million gold enchants that I just still can't get like a decent roll on. But now I know what you're talking about. I love the corruption system actually in Path of Exile, and it was adapted into a game that I really enjoy playing called Project Diablo 2, Diablo 2 mod, fairly popular one. But that really adds a lot of customability of your items. It adds time to the end game too. You're not just getting all of your perfect gear right away. Like, we're not seeing much improvements in terms of gear once you get to the late game. Like, you get maybe 20 more item power and a few percentage points more on all your ideal affixes, best in case scenario, or something like a corruption that has the power to swing the needle one way or another in a great way. It's just it unlocks that next level of gear and dopamine and the things that ARPG gamers are used to getting and have become accustomed to with modern day ARPGs. I mean, it's a fairly common mechanic that's been adapted to many games. So,
you know what it is? It's like, technically, our version of that is getting a Harlequins, right? It's just like the Uber, but it's the worst version possible because like you've gone from like, imagine you're looking like what we're talking about here that Poe does really well is like you're going up steps, right? Step, 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 step. But in Diablo, it's like step, step, And then there's just a giant gap and a step like 6 feet up, and that's where the uber uniques are, right? Like the Harlequins. There's no
You know,
bridge.
JP, I'm waiting for that moment where I get an unique, and it is like the one that I will never use.
Dude, you know it's gonna happen.
I'm like very excited for that. Like that's what I'm waiting for.
Why? Because that's the moment you'll install Diablo and
Melted
install
Heart of
Poe.
Selig. I'm just like this is some like random one. Like maybe I can make a build out of it, but like I'm looking at this thing. I'm like, I was looking for a grandfather. Like,
See, I love like Josh through this whole thing. Like we've been going for a while now. He's like just trying to be positive about everything. My brain right there. I don't know if I'm the only one in this call that had that thought. Is like, no, I know what I'm doing with that uber unique I don't want. That's a piece of content going onto YouTube, and the title is going to say, "I got an uber unique and deleted it." It's going to get good click through, okay? I can guarantee you that. But I will hate the fact that it took me 300 plus hours to even get that damn thing. One thing in that late game, by the way, that I am more happy about is like this. We kind of teased it a little bit around Mekalb's poor process of paving the path for Lucky earlier on the podcast. But thank God for this. Although I'm still asking and begging Blizzard, just add loadouts to the game, please. I want loadouts, so like 2 or 3 loadouts so I can switch between builds quickly. Oh my God. The amount of times I would respec and do different things. It'd be incredible.
I haven't really thought of that, but that would be incredible. I'd spend the gold doing it. It's just that hour that's just really frustrating of unclicking everything
Yes.
and re-clicking.
You know where you can just unclick everything in one click? DiabloBuilds.com. That's right. That's why the calculator is better than what you can do in game. Literally one button and I've reset everything. Oh my God.
Yeah, save your gold from trial and error. Just use the tool.
Yeah. All right. I think there were a few little things left over just to kind of like hash out the final ones. I think we covered most of them. More stash tabs, yay. But maybe, I don't know if you guys heard about like the reason why we have issues with stashes, like the way they programmed the game so that you're loading all the players in the environments. Maybe fix that first, Blizzard, and then we can have like 20 stashes. You could even charge me real money for them, and I actually would pay for them. And are we all in agreement? Would you all actually pay premium like currency to get more stashes if that's what it took?
I've done it in Path of Exile. Now that's a free to play game. Paying the price tag for Diablo 4, I think people have a reasonable expectation to have enough stash space to operate on. So I'd like to see maybe twice what we have now for free. But if you want to do something past that, or make a really special kind of tab that'll organize all your sigils and or even extracted aspects or something like that, I'm all for it. Yeah, add something like that. I think that'd be really cool. And I'll pay $5 for it, whatever. I don't.
Hell yeah.
Not a big deal.
It saves me building mules.
Yeah, if it's
sorry, because I realized, boys, we've been going almost 2 hours. Apologies for that. Hopefully people will follow through to the end here. But just to round out this, because I know we're running short on time. Can we just there's been some criticisms of Blizzard. I think it's well earned. I do want to give them a round of applause for this, because this is the removal of especially these two things that are not good gameplay mechanics. They are just frustrating. There's a difference between creating a challenge for a player that's fun to overcome and creating a chore that's tedious to deal with. And the amount of times today on stream I rolled Resource Burn or Cold Enchanted, I was so close to just ending the stream halfway through. So
what's funny? There's a patch note for Resource Burn that they fixed an issue where it was applying from close enemies and not just distant. But then they removed it later in the patch notes. Same patch. Because I only read the one where they fixed it. I was like, oh, okay, at least they fixed it. But now I'm kind of happy that it's gone altogether.
Thank God.
Just, silly that they had both of those notes in.
Are there any quickly to round out this full, actually go to Mekalb? Thinking of remaining affixes you can get on Nightmare Dungeons, are there any other ones that you feel are surprising that are still in if these are being removed? Is there something else that needs to go?
I don't really think so. I think those are probably the worst ones. Backstab would always just get me. Because if you're Whirlwind, it's everything's behind you. So and with Still Grasp, you like some monsters go behind you too, so it's hard to navigate. But no, I haven't had too much of an issue with stuff like that. They all have their unique changes, unique stats. You just kind of ignore some of them, is what I do. I think it's kind of ironic that they just put in this heart that my understanding is it reduces draining effects by like 80 to 90%, and now they're just
Yeah.
throwing it out. That like you could have just swapped one ring, and probably that wouldn't be an issue. But they're just like, nope, we need to make the masses happy.
Yeah. It's like, well, you've still got the resource generation, so I guess it's something in there. I guess like a good way of closing this out is, I mean, my feeling when we started season 1 was that this is not going to be enough for 3 months of content. How do you guys feel about the future of this game for the next 3 months? Because my feeling is like if we don't have a season 1.5, we could be in like big trouble when it comes to player base. You guys feeling that way too? Do you feel like there needs to be
I
big
think
thing?
that the state of the game, I think the core fundamental part, like core of the game, is really good. I think a lot of the abilities, I mean, need some adjustment at times, like charge needs to be wider, as Mekalb said. But I like the fact that you have a rotation. I like the fact that you have these, solid defenses. I enjoy having 6 buttons to push rather than one, a bunch of buffs. Um, I just think that things like damage over time should be negative. I think vulnerable. I think they just need new ways to apply it. Um, I personally would enjoy if we have like overlays in game for altars of Lilith and things like that. Be nice to have some functionality to kind of interact with the game a bit more and other developers. Personally, I would love if my calculator can just tell you the upgrade of the game, but where that goes in the future. But I think that really more content would always be good, but also I just think that if they just keep buffing these abilities, but also compensate for actual problems for why people aren't using these other abilities, other than just buff, 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 actually, you know, give the solve the problem underneath it. Vulnerability usually the case, or just some kind of problem where you're pulling enemies into you and then they kill you because you don't have enough damage reduction tied to it, kind of like Storm Strike provides or teleport. Uh, if they just keep doing what they're doing, but like with a bit more like logic to it and nuance, I think the game would be really good. It needs more content, but 3 months is enough time to create new content. So we'll see. I mean, I think the game doesn't necessarily need new content to survive. In like the halfway point, I just think it really needs some more tools to make realize they don't have to bone spear twisting blades for the rest of the game over and over again.
I think this is the point, Josh, where what you're trying to propose there is on your shirt. So if you just kind of, yeah, if you go there, you can theory craft a bunch of builds, is what Josh is trying to get at. He's so subtle. I love that. Mekalb, what's your feelings? Like, content needs to be more of it. Are we going to be okay waiting? Run me through the thought.
So about 2 weeks ago, I slid into someone's DM who works for Blizzard, and I basically said, "Hey, do you need game testers?" Usually I don't say a lot of words, but when I say stuff, I'm like heavily suggesting things. And I was like, I don't live in California, obviously, but I could do like a contract or a part-time basis and just provide feedback because we were preparing for season 1 by doing a lot of speedrunning. I was like, they're about to watch all the top players sit in a stronghold for 8 hours and then do Surat Slayer for the next 20 or 30 hours. And I think that with a little bit of good feedback, and then I actually really, really like what Lucky suggested with the campaign is there are other ways to do it. And if you can make a incentivized in campaign saying that when you get out, you get a free level 50 character, whether you want to upgrade your character or make a new one, that would have been badass. Like that, because that's a good 3, 4, 5 hours depending on your pace, and something like that would have been awesome. And being someone in Diablo 2 who plays it every season, everyone plays for the first week. half the people stop around weeks 2 and 3, and then there's like 15% a month after that. And we all just kind of let the hype just kind of simmer, brood, or whatever. And then the next season comes out, and we all no life it for a week. So I think Blizzard has a way to make the game really fun. It might not be a full 3 months, but I think if they smarten up and like really use the content that they have available and incentivize people to use it, it could be a really fun game that people just play for years and play every season and really enjoy it.
Over to you, Lucky.
Yeah, so I mean, if we're talking about ARPGs, the life cycle of an ARPG, none of them last for a full season, 3 months, whatever. It doesn't matter what game it is. Path of Exile has essentially unlimited endgame, and player base does not hold on for the entirety of the season. But what Diablo 4 does need is the option to have that content if the player wants to do it. So give us options, right? Give us options to do the story. Give us options of additional content in endgame that we're going to need to go into the Diablo Builds calculator to figure out how to beat. Get like Uber Lilith, you know, that was a great example of one boss that you really got to sit down and sort of noodle on how to beat it. But guess what? In season 1, we didn't get anything additional to that. You know, it was the same content, but with a couple different aspects to help us out, you know, to get there. There was nothing new to experience. The Malignant Tunnels are just dungeons all over again. Like, it's not anything new. It's not anything additional to work towards, to build around, to try to theory craft and overcome and defeat at the end of the day. So that's what an ARPG is all about. I really enjoy having a new challenge each season that I would like, you know, that I hone in on and I say, this is what I want to do. For the launch, it was Uber Lilith. This season, it's, you know, the tier 100 map. They ended up nerfing them, but that's my goal for this season. So, you know, I want something that I have to, because I'm a theory crafter at heart. I want to have to theory craft. I want to think about it. I want to go in. I want to use all my tools, all my Diablo Builds tools, and make the best build that I can, and really do something that I think is impressive and fun. So, for that reason, I think, you know, having the same content but with new aspects really didn't do it for me personally. I would have liked to see a little bit more to fight. Like that boss that they advertised as an Uber boss turned out he was only level 80. Like, why not give us a level 100 option? What's the harm in giving us something like that's a bit of a challenge? I don't see why that would ever be perceived as bad by the community. So more stuff like that would be right up my alley.
I'm on board with that. That was kind of my feeling. That's why I was kind of leaning this content thing. Like, I'm worried because I don't think we're going to get a 1.5 because they're going to save it all for season 2, right? To make sure it punches hard when it arrives. But options can never be a bad idea. Sure, someone's going to have their min-max option, but I think someone that every one of us has said in some way or form is like, you know, from Josh saying he goes for these kind of hipster builds that are off meta, right? That's another example of having options. What you were just directly saying, Lucky, what I've heard from Mekalb of like different situations, scenarios with barbarians, it's all about when we play these games, give me extra ways to play. It doesn't matter if it's less efficient, especially as a content creator, that's a new way of going. Like, as a guy who wants to make events, my brain is like, you know, like if we had Varshan, I already had like a cool mid-season 1 tournament idea where I say speed run from the moment you start Lilith to completing Varshan, fastest time, right? Things like that. There's like loads of kind of creative little things you do. And there's even small, easy lifts like Nightmare Dungeons. Why is there a limit? Why is 100 a limit? Why, if all we're doing is increasing a number at a regulated threshold, why not have up to tier 999, right? Because then, like, it's kind of a lazy late game form of content, but it's something to aim for. So I agree with that sentiment. Like, more options, never a bad idea. Diversify the content. But boys, I've kept you a very long time here. I just want to round out this podcast by saying thanks to all you for joining me. Also, thank you to our sponsors. We haven't got any. So actually, if someone wants to sponsor us, go ahead and pitch to me. I'm always up for free stuff. And I'll be sure to throw it your way as well, guys. But if you guys want to find more of these wonderful folks, I've included a way to find them. I mean, Josh was a little bit more cryptic. Josh, I don't think you have like social media or Twitch or anything that you want people to follow you on, do you?
I don't.
You don't care.
I'm so in.
Just use his tool.
Yeah, use his tool. Follow Diablo Builds and you follow him. He's the brain behind it. But for Lucky Luciano, that's his Twitch. Go follow him there. And Mekalb, you can find him stream as well. Both wonderful folks. I just lurk in the background their streams. If you're in for speedrunning or you're just in for a fun, friendly face, they'll hit that either way. Definitely go pull one out for Mekalb. He needs people to comfort him over the Barbarian right now, get him through it. And I'm sure they'll come back in season 2 stronger, Mekalb. We can pray.
Hope so, yeah.
But thank you guys. Has been a pleasure. Until next time, folks, because I think we'll be doing more of these.